So this reminds me, thank you very much. This reminds me of when you're giving the last talk of the day before the wine and cheese, it's a tough audience. And when I was in graduate school, I taught statistics to psych majors who had put it off for 4 years but needed to pass it in order to graduate with a degree in psychology. And none of the faculty wanted to teach that class because, ugh. But I said, yeah, I'll do it. And to me, that's like the challenge. So I had fun and tried my best, and I think I did okay. But that's sort of been what I like to do in my career, say, oh, that's really hard. Well, okay, let's try. Anyway, thank you. I want to talk about a couple things, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. But I'm going to track back to when I was in graduate school, and I think that's why I obviously was not in your field. I don't know your fields particularly well, but I did feel, and maybe you haven't, but I did feel like, am I supposed to be doing this? And for me, the answer was no. So the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, had this fellowship, and they took 10 weeks, and they took scientists who put their dreams about being a science communicator and set them down in a real newsroom. So I wound up working in a local television station in Washington, D.C. It was really kind of goofy. It was like, have you ever seen their sitcoms about people who work in television stations? It was just like that. Anyway, but after that I was hooked. And the reason I bring up the application is because they said to you, why do you want to be a science communicator? And I've read the applications as a judge for picking the next generation, so I know what everyone says. It's so important for the public to understand science. You know, they have science is in their lives, it's part of their world, it's what they got to do, and they need somebody to teach them about it, or not teach, because that's a horrible word for communicators, but inform, that's the word we prefer. And I wrote the same essay, I mean a version of it, much better than anyone else's, of course. And I believe that for most of my career, because why am I bothering to do this communication thing if it's, you know, I mean, it's just self-indulgent, blah, 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 if nobody's listening. But I have become a little dismayed in the recent years about the ability of science communication to change the world, which is what I wanted to do. For example, I wanted to explain climate change so clearly and so, showing what the consequences were that people would go, oh my God, we've got to do something about this. That didn't work. Or, I mean, there's been any one of a number of things. And the other thing is, I mean, I was just visiting CERN, the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, and I was traveling with a bunch of high school students, and I said to them, why should the European Union spend all this money on CERN? It's $1 billion a year. What's the point? And I said, well, it's and then one kid said, oh, just take it away from the military budget and you'll be fine. And I said, okay, we're talking about a zero-sum game here. But I thought, well, if I can convince people or explain it to them or show them the wonder and the magic and the unbelievable insights to the natural world that's going to come out of this machine and none other, they may understand why we're spending the money on it. Of course, I still can't explain what a Higgs boson is, so that's a problem. But so I think, and we were talking about this just before, there's this thing called the information deficit model. People make bad decisions because they don't really understand the problem, and they don't really understand. You don't really understand what the Large Hadron Collider is doing, and once you understand, you'll want to reach deep into your pocket and give the scientists money. And I think that's wrong. I think people make decisions based on a lot of factors, many of which have nothing to do with information and logic and clarity and interestingness. And so that's why the title of this talk is You Can't Win, but You've Got to Play. It's sort of a riff on the laws of thermodynamics, which I think is funny, because I believe that scientists, the scientific community, policymakers have an obligation to explain to the public why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, when Pfizer makes a vaccine for COVID-19, they can just do whatever they want. They're a private company. They have to explain it to their stockholders or their board of directors, but public, nah. And believe me, interviewing pharmaceutical people when they don't want to be interviewed is not a profitable exercise. But the rest of the public domain for this is just, you've got to put the right information out there. It's got to be out there, even if it doesn't have the impact you want. And I also, Pollyanna-ishly, believe that if you put it out there in a really interesting way with really compelling facts or stories, by the way, we're going to talk about stories a lot because people like stories. Scientists don't like, scientists, especially scientists who speak at scientific meetings, like to say, look at the data. That's what I'm here to talk to you about. But people remember stories. I mean, of course you remember the details in your field, but especially you guys in interdisciplinary, where you've got things coming from different directions, and you maybe aren't as familiar with the guy sitting next to you or the woman sitting next to you of their jargon. But there's some universals like, oh my God, we got to that point and we were completely stuck. I mean, I use that in a lot of my pieces, and the show producers hate it because that's not a billboard quote. You know, that's not the money quote, and then we got stuck. But it's a great piece of tape for telling a story because it says, oh, well, you were doing something you were trying to do, and then you got stuck. What happened next? So it's that thing that you want to bring people along with. Okay. So just to review a little bit, before I got interested in science communication, I had a job as a lab technician in Scripps Clinic and Research Foundation. And I'm showing you this picture. It was taken in, not Acapulco, what's the town just south of San Diego in the border of California? Tijuana, that's right. So we're in Tijuana, we're drinking Tecate beer, because that's what we liked. And I'm going to show you this picture in order to show you another picture. So then I did apply to graduate school, got into graduate school, did the graduate school thing, and then decided that I wasn't going to be cut out for graduate school. So I started looking around for work, and I actually bumped around doing various things. I lived in High Wycombe, or I worked in High Wycombe for a year, writing basically advertising copy. It was about Drayton radiator control valves, which, great topic, very interesting. And then I got hired by Nature in a strange, and we can talk about it if anybody's interested, but just like one day the editor of Nature called up and said, hey, would you like to come work for us? So I tell people that's how you get a job at Nature, you just answer the phone. And then I was traded to science for a future draft pick, that's what we say. And I worked there for a few years, and I got to see all kinds of interesting stuff. I'm just going to show you a couple of my favorite. That's me at the South Pole. That's very flat. I have a great sign on the wall that says, ski South Pole, 1/2 inch of powder and 2 miles of base. I got to go to Alaska. That's a caribou getting friendly with me. This was at NPR. And one of the cooler things just recently was this is in the bottom of the Grand Canyon where, I don't know if you can see, there's a guy with a yellow thing that's hanging down from the back of his head. That's me, and I was supposed to be helping these hydrologists become better communicators because they want people to understand the issues relating to the Colorado River, which are innumerable and intractable. So there you go. Now, I'm going to be a little catty here, but that picture is me, of course, And one of the people in the first picture I showed you, and just to help refresh your memory. So that's me sitting on the far left as you look at it, and that guy who's smiling standing next to me is the guy in the cowboy hat with the bandito mustache. And the reason I pick him out is that we spent this year together. We had I was a terrible lab technician, just awful, but he managed to do some work without me. And we had a lot of fun. Clock goes forward and he wins the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine for checkpoint inhibitors because he was studying T cells and he got interested. Now, I don't know how many of you have met Nobel laureates, but Jim Allison was one of those people that you would certainly say, well, he's smart, but he's no Nobel Prize winner. So don't judge, is my... anyway, and I think he looks like my mother-in-law. But I didn't say that to him. Okay, so coming back to this business about helping people make informed decisions. So what I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking to you about is what I would sort of call best practices for communicating. And if you think just for a minute about what has just transpired between us, you being the audience, me being the speaker, I've tried to engage you. I don't, maybe maybe you're here because the funder is watching and we'll make a note of who didn't show up, Or maybe you're here because, it's going to rain and this is dry. But I'm always trying to engage people and help them become interested in things that I'm interested or think is important. So some of the things that I was going to go over in this part of the talk were, well, we talked a little bit about this, the information deficit model, dead. Nobody believes, most people believe. Although constantly people are saying, well, we'll get to that. Yeah, maybe I should get to it now. Huh. I can't. Oh, well, yeah, okay. Whoops, come back. Okay. The question is, well, no, let's keep going. Never mind. So how do people make decisions? Well, they make them based on their social group a lot of the time. If it's a religious group, it's their pastor. If it's a social group, it's some social icon. If it's, I don't know. But usually you make a decision that's consistent with the behavior of your group. But, and this is where I wanted to go next. So how many of you have heard of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the anti-vaxxers? Okay. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is actually challenging Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination for president. And Robert Kennedy Jr., and I couldn't say this when I was working for NPR, but I can say it now, Robert Kennedy Jr. is a wingnut. I mean, he's missing a few parts. And this goes to the information deficit model because he has been going around saying to people, the scientists won't debate me on this. They know I'm right and they're too afraid. And this guy, Farhad Manjoo, wrote an editorial in the July 11th New York Times, which I saw, or June 11th, sorry. And it just really said it all to me. You can come armed with all the facts in the world, but when you're dealing with a conspiracist, there's no real way to win an argument. For people whose views aren't anchored to facts, winning is simply getting attention, and when you publicly argue with someone like Kennedy, you've already lost. So there's a guy named Peter Hotez who's been very pro-vaccine, and he wrote a book called Vaccines Didn't Cause My Daughter's Autism, which is the case, well, that's what he says. I think it's true. And they've offered him, various conservative groups have offered him $2 million to come and debate Robert Kennedy. No, because it's not an academic arena. I mean, it's like one side is constrained by the rules of science and logic and accuracy, and the other side is constrained by nothing except the belief that something is bad for you. Now, I'm not going to say that there are not issues related to vaccines, but it does have to do with probability. And people like to complain about the media not doing a very good job of explaining probability, and that may be true, but I also argue that the government doesn't do a very good job of explaining probability, because if they did, no one would buy a lottery ticket. And that was something a guy said to me at CERN. He said, your chances of winning the lottery are the same whether you buy a ticket or not. And when you get to zero, it's pretty close. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting. The other one, which I didn't bring a picture of this, but it's in the news again. It blows me away. Anybody hear of Pizzagate? So Pizzagate was this, it came out of WikiLeaks. There were some leaked emails between John Podesta, who was in the White House or on Hillary Clinton's campaign staff, and Hillary Clinton, and they were sitting in this restaurant called Comet Pizza and Ping Pong. And I read a deconstruction of it, but it's the craziest thing. Did you know that child pornography and cheese pizza start with the same two letters? So that was the kind of evidence that they had to prove that this was a child molestation ring, and that they were drinking the blood of Christian babies, which is an old trope. And the reason this one particularly bugs me is I've been taking my kids to Comet Pizza and Ping Pong for as long as they can remember, because it's our local pizza place. And I've never seen a secret door to the basement, but it's secret, so I wouldn't have seen it. You know? So it doesn't matter what I say, you know, of course I wouldn't see it. And that, for people, I will leap to the conclusion and say, for people like us, that's just I start sputtering at that point, and it just makes me crazy. So I'm hoping that you guys can think of other ways of engaging these people and maybe bring something. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some common misconceptions in science communication, and we're ready for the first video.
Hi, I'm science correspondent Joe Palca. A lot of people say scientists aren't good communicators, and I say that's not so. It's just sometimes scientists forget who their audience is. Consider this scene. What'll it be, Professor? I'd like 2 scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and coffee with milk and sugar. Okay, coming up. See? Easy. And here's what scientists don't do. What'll it be, Professor? I'd like 57 grams of vortexed and heat-denatured emulsified ovalbumin, an excision of sodium nitrate-cured porcine abdominal wall with a minimum of subcutaneous fat exposed to severe thermal transfer, 2 8 by 8 by 1.25 centimeter polyhedrons of triticum estivum fermented with Saccharomyces cerevisiae and subjected to the Maillard reaction, and 350 milliliters of steam-extracted coffee Arabica containing plenty of methylxanthine. Make sure it's at least 360 degrees Kelvin, and yes, I will need a little bovine lacteal secretion and some glucopyranosyl fructopyranoside.
Oh, I forgot this is
So you want 2 eggs scrambled, bacon, toast, and coffee with cream and sugar. Oh, that's what I just said. When scientists order breakfast, they're not dumbing down their message. They're using language that's appropriate for the circumstances. If scientists want to get better at communicating their science, they're going to have to use language that gets their meaning across without providing so much detail. Actually, can you hold the glucopyranosyl fructopyranoside? I'm on a diet. All right, we could do that.
So that was my way of trying to Let me just see if there's, yeah, okay. That was my way of trying to point out that when you order breakfast, you're not dumbing it down. And I hate that version. And I've told people that if I could accurately condense your 20-year or 30-year or 40-year scientific career into 3.5 minutes, you haven't done very much. So I am forced to leave a lot out. And then you have to keep asking yourself, for the purposes of this discussion, how much can I leave in? And I would argue, and I know this is an interdisciplinary group, but I would argue that scientists, even when talking to other scientists, could leave more stuff out at the start. And then once they've made the big picture clearer, then start diving into the details. And only the details that the people they're communicating with need to know to understand what they're doing. Because there's this temptation to say, oh, we did this, we did that, we did this other thing. And sometimes you don't need all that. So that's one of the things. The next thing when you're giving a talk is to know who your audience is. And I mean, I know that sounds simple-minded, but obviously the talk you're going to give to a bunch of high school students is going to be different from the talk you're going to give to a bunch of postdocs in your field. But I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago where someone asked me, who did I think my audience was? And I said, well, the NPR listeners. And she said, no. More specifically than that, who are you talking to when you write your pieces? And I thought about it for a while, and I said, I'm talking to science phobes. I'm trying to reach people who wouldn't otherwise be the least bit interested and get them to come along. And the trick is to get them to come along without pissing off the scientists who think, why are you making that so simple? And, you know, I think I've done that successfully in my career because I don't have people in the scientific community yelling at me. But that's why I don't like the show called Science Friday. I mean, I like it, it's just fine. But Science Friday is not for non-scientists because nobody's going to tune into a show called Science Friday if you're not already interested in science. Sorry, Science Friday is NPR's, and you know, NPR's science talk show. And here, I mean, my friend of mine who worked at NPR is now the producer of Infinite Monkey Cage. And you'd be pretty insightful if you could figure out that that had anything to do with science. So it's a lot more appealing, in my opinion, for reaching a general audience. Let's see what comes next. Oh, dumb down. Yeah, I hate that expression, dumb down, because it presumes that your audience is dumb. And that's not a good place to start from when you're talking to people that you want to convince of something or get to understand or to pay attention to you. And don't be condescending. And again, seems sort of straightforward, but there are a lot of people who say, well, I could explain this to you, but you wouldn't understand it. Don't do that. If I were going to use that phrase, I would say, I can explain this to you, but you don't need to know it. What you do need to know is X, Y, and Z. Okay, so the slide basically talks about jargon, and it's not necessary for the talk to hear, to watch the video, but it's amusing. Jargon, don't use it. And it is incredibly easy to slip into it because I worked at NPR, and we call the afternoon show All Things Considered. So I would say, oh, yeah, I've got a piece on ATC. And they're going, what has air traffic control got to do with your radio story? It just comes off your tongue without thinking. So it's always good to look back through what you did to see if you use any jargon. Now, the one area of the newspaper, and this, I love this, the one area of the newspaper you are totally allowed to use jargon is the sports page. Because I read that a googly is a delivery which looks like a normal leg spinner, but actually turns towards the batsman like an off break rather than away from the bat. Now, I know what the word bat means, and I know what the word butt means. I mean, in that, nobody would be fazed by that description. That was from the BBC webpage, helping non-cricket people learn about cricket. Holy smokes. Yeah. You want to play that now? Okay, I'm ready.
Hi, I'm NPR science correspondent Joe Palca. Good science journalism usually means eliminating jargon.
Maybe you should have thought of that before doing a story about a Frank Casper sigma phase in sphere-forming block copolymer melts.
Yeah, probably. But what about when jargon doesn't sound like jargon? Like this.
Hi, Joe.
What?
Question for you. Do you have a plastic brain?
What are you talking about? Go away.
Joe, are you dating anything?
Come on, what do you mean anything? Anyway, I'm married.
Hey, Joe,
What?
is that an asteroid belt you're wearing?
Oh. Why, yes, it is. Obviously, astronomers need something different than fashionistas when they talk about an asteroid belt. And for geologists, when they talk about dating, they're talking about the age of rocks. And for neuroscientists, having a plastic brain is a good thing. It means a brain that can adapt and respond to an injury. So it's not just jargon words you need to be careful of. It's words that mean one thing to a scientist and something else to just about all the rest of us.
Hey, I have an idea. I think I'll throw coins into cracks in the earth after an earthquake.
Why?
Because I want to be generous. To a fault.
Oh, that hurts.
So, again, and for you really observant viewers, nobody's ever caught this, so it doesn't matter that you didn't. I'm wearing a different pair of pants the first time I show the asteroid belt, because I forgot we were going to reshoot it. I didn't bring in the same pants. That's so funny. Nobody's noticed. But anyway, it makes the point. I think it's a little obvious, but those dual meaning, a long time I thought that neuroscientists had stolen the word plastic from the polymer industry, but it's actually the other way around. Brain plasticity was a thing before the plastics existed. Anyway, I started to tell you about throwing up into my hat because I worked with this woman at Nature named Vera Rich, and she was amazing. She was this Russian expat, was always very animated, and she would be typing at her time, and then she'd lean over and throw up into her wastebasket, and going, whoa, it's so crazy. But that's what I mean about a story. I mean, totally irrelevant to the talk, right? Not totally, but I'm trying to get you to realize that the things that turn out to be memorable or engaging often are not the things that you came to talk about. Sometimes they are. Oh, that's another thing. Well, I guess I just did an example of that. I mean, again, if you're worried about seeming like a expert who's talking down to people, tell them a self-deprecating story. Like you're thinking about throwing up into your hat because you don't feel good. And as you can tell, I'm a big fan, not always successful, of finding humor. Because talks can be so serious. And anyway. And then for humor, I thought I'd give you an example. These are some of the, it's from a website called spuriouscorrelations.com. And this is letters in the winning word of Scripps National Spelling Bee and number of people killed by venomous spiders. This gets to correlation and causation. And another one, this one is my even bigger favorite. Divorce rate in Maine and per capita consumption of margarine. So to prove that I am a good scientifically trained journalist, I went to PubMed and I put in divorce and margarine. And I got no hits. And by the way, I want you to know that I was so proud of getting that thing to grow bigger. Okay, other tips. Wonder what I had. Tell stories, share something personal, find humor. I seem to be going, oh, That's the final thing. I think it's the final thing. Yes, it's the final thing. This may be obvious, but I'll say it anyway. I could tell you how to drive a car if you've never driven one. Put the key in the ignition, check your mirrors, look at the steering wheel. One pedal goes forward, one pedal brakes. You shift with this, you have to look behind you, forward, back. Okay, bye. It ain't enough to know how it works or have it described to you. You have to do it. Now, luckily, you're less likely to kill anybody with an attempt at science communication than you are if you tried driving a car the first time. But I really think it's just, I mean, some people would say, could you come and do a weekend or a 3-hour workshop in science communication so that we'll all know how to do it? And I said, okay. And would you come over and do a 3-hour workshop on organic chemistry so I'll know how that works? I mean, it's insulting. I didn't come fully formed into the world of science communication. I worked at it a long time, and I got good at it. Oh, I remember the last thing was, sometime you're going to have to talk to the media, or you may have to talk to the media, and I love this slide because you have to understand where reporters are coming from. And this is how reporters start their day, and it's, today I'm an expert in politics, the economy, stocks, bondage, food. And it just cracks me up, but that's a lot of, some places are lucky enough to have the money for a science department or a science desk, but mostly they're not. So keep that in mind. You're talking to people who really don't really know your field. And the other thing is, people get all frustrated. I don't know what he understood or she understood. I mean, I said it all totally clearly, and when I read the article, it was a jumbled mess. I think that you have more agency in an interview than you probably give yourself credit for. And you're always able to say, look, that's a kind of a complicated topic. Tell me what you heard, and I'll tell you if you've got it right. There's ways to do it gently, but there's ways to find out if the person is on the wrong page. So the other thing you should do, although this is a pain in the ass, is after that person has made a mistake in an article because he or she didn't understand you, it'd be nice to just let them know. They don't love being corrected, but I don't know if you're familiar with this, maybe it's true in cricket, but in baseball, when you argue with the umpire over whether it's a ball or a strike, he's never going to change his mind, but he might change the next decision. So you're not arguing with him about what just happened, you're arguing for the future. Okay, that's it. Wine is on the way soon. I'd be happy to take any questions.